So, first of all, I just want to thank everyone for attending it. But we're going to start since it said that we're going to 4 o'clock. So, let's start at 4 o'clock as stated, right? So, okay. So what is e-commerce community? So, e-commerce is actually based in Indonesia. We've been doing webinars in Indonesia as well. Previously, pre-pandemic, we've been doing webinars, but face-to-face webinars, like a meetup, like a small community meetup. And right now, we're currently expanding through Singapore and Thailand and also in Hong Kong. So in Ace Commerce, this is basically a community of Asia Commerce. Asia Commerce is the cross-boarding solution that is based on Indonesia. So if you guys are interested when it comes to transporting your products, basically, specifically through the ASEAN region, please feel free to contact me or Asia Commerce. And okay, next. So we also give online education and online. So we're currently drafting online webinars right now. So we've been doing webinars for like the past months. We started around February and up until today, and we've been having amazing speakers as well. If you guys are a part of the Facebook group page of Ace Commerce, you'd see that we have like a lot of amazing speakers in Ace Commerce. In addition to this, we also strive to provide the best online opportunities, which means that we've been drafting online the people with people. So without further ado, I would just like to plug in the graph on the links that are on the box. But I'm excited to introduce you to our speaker today. Hello, Michelle. Executive Officer of Sir, co-founder of Loop. So, ayun. Hi, Sir Pocholo. Please feel free po to share your screen if you have a
Yeah, I have a presentation. Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. Can you guys hear me clearly?
Yes, it's so clear po.
All right, great. Let me just share my screen. Oh.
Can you share it po? I allowed it po kanina.
Oh, yep. 1 second. I don't know why it's not. Should have. Oh, there you go.
Thank you so much.
Can you guys see that?
Yes, we can see it po.
There. All right. Are we good to start?
Yes, we're good to start.
All right. So hi, everyone. Good afternoon. My name is Pocholo Espina, and I am the Chief Executive Officer of SIP-PH and Loop, a Filipino enterprise that champions waste management solutions for the people and the planet. One of the key things that we do through our brands called SIP and Loop is that we provide eco alternatives to your everyday goods. So the idea is that even the simple things like bubble wrap can actually has sustainable alternatives. But today I'll be talking a lot more about how exactly do we build these types of businesses and what strategies do we employ to make sure that it's not just sustainable on an environmental end, but also sustainable on a commerce and business end. Before anything, though, I wanted to share to you of how I actually started this business, because I think it's very important for people to understand that, sure, it's good. We can definitely, for anyone out there in the audience that might be very interested in, like, I want to start my own sustainable business. I do think, yeah, go ahead. Why not do it right away? But one of the things that I advise everyone to do is actually experience it firsthand. Now, what this is one of the foundational things that I was able to build back when I was much younger. And I think Kiara mentioned it earlier about everyone mostly being college students, right? So I actually joined this organization back in college. It's called ISDA, which is a skin diving organization. Back in my school, yeah, ISDA, yeah, that's exactly designed as supposed to be funny, I guess. Anyway, one of the key things that we did was that we actually went down and dove without scuba gear, and that way you'd have to hold your breath. So it was very, very enlightening because it was the first time I was able to experience what they meant when they said that the Philippines is the center of biodiversity in the world. But the more glaring thing, sadly, and it became much more apparent as the years passed, was that these same places where we witness the beauty of the Philippines and the beauty of our oceans is that we are also the third largest polluter of plastic waste in our oceans. Most of these come from our tributaries and from our rivers. And this is a big problem in my head that I was like, isn't it an odd contrast that we are the center of biodiversity. It's a beautiful place. The Philippines is a beautiful country and not a small one at that. And yet we experience these types of really bad problems that really taint the experience as a whole. So one time when my friends and I were out diving, and this was sakto siya around after habagat season, and that's when it was where the trash was really a lot. So what happened was that when you go up and catch your breath, what happened was you'd you'd end up possibly having plastic in your mouth, which is pretty disgusting if you ask me. So that was really the most enlightening part and really set the foundation for me that okay, I know I want to do something about it. That much was clear to me. But of course, it's one thing to think of something, to tell yourself that hey, I'm gonna do it, but to really do it is a completely different step. And I understand anyone else out there who might have ideas now. Oh, this will be really one of the biggest stepping stones, forcing yourself to do what you said you were gonna do, right? So this was my version of that. It was very, very simple. I started out with just a Facebook page and literally posting on my feed. And at the same time, this was one of the most groundbreaking posts that we had, which I think one was really set the stage. It was a Facebook group, and this was much more uso back then, and now not as much. More a little bit more about Facebook Marketplace these days. But back then, this was how we would sell things, and it was pretty okay. It was a good start. It wasn't much. It wasn't the type of business that would definitely be more than enough to sustain yourself. It was really just a frustration as a student. I was fourth year back then, and I wanted to do something. I didn't want to be talk shit na like, oh, usap lang palagi. I wanted to really do something about it. So this was really just the first step in all of this. But this fortunately really paved the way for everything else. I was able to meet the right people. I was able to start building beyond just this Facebook post. Example, we started increasing our reach mostly through putting ourselves in physical stores like Common Room, like now we're actually in Rustan. So that was a big deal that really propelled our growth. And true enough, a few years later, about not a few years, about 2 years later, I would say I finally told myself, yep, I'm finally financially independent. This business can sustain me as an individual. Mostly because we went viral a lot. It was one of the key things that really put us out from that idea stage. It was now officially a business that was built on a trend, but a business nonetheless. So we became the retail leader, we've sold around 300,000 straws to date. And eventually, we were even able to transition into corporate eco giveaways. Unfortunately, we got stuck here and we didn't really know what exactly was next for SIP. I think a lot of people in the audience might be more familiar with the fact that metal straws are used to be one of the biggest things for the environment, but it's very clear. And even with us from the start, we didn't claim it to solve your problem. It was not gonna solve the waste problem. There are those statistics that are thrown a lot online where you can see that plastic straws only account for less than 1% of plastic waste in our oceans, and that much is true. That wasn't even the intention of the business. It was just really this simple thing that we use a lot and we use often. That's something we could start with and eventually replace into some alternatives, or in some cases not even use them at all. But of course, as with most things, a lot of trends especially died out. We didn't really plan that well, and that didn't do well. That didn't help us as a business. Eventually, it got wiped out by COVID-19. Luckily, around 2018, we were actually able to establish a store. We already saw the idea that yeah, maybe it's pretty clear that this is a more trend, definitely with an advocacy, but a trend nonetheless. And we need to transition to a model that is much more sustainable, much more scalable, and much more, of course, on an advocacy end, much more sustainable. It was something that was clear that people could transition once they go to the store store, they can transition not just a straw, but a lot of things within their lifestyle. We were one of the first eco stores that had a brick and mortar store back in 2018. And we started with about around 25 to 30 brands. And that was about, I think, 100 products back then. Now we have much more, around 50 brands with almost 1,000 by now. We even planned for opening a second branch back in May 2020. But we all know what happened. We all know what happened. So thankfully, we didn't put out any money yet. So that was very lucky for us. We ended up closing the store in 2020. But fortunately, we knew that we had one more thing in our, how do you call this? May isa pa kaming bala, and that was our online store. It was really intended just as an additional supplement for the store rather than our main thing. But what happened was we decided that, yep, maybe this is it. Maybe this is the time we have to pivot and figure out how can we improve on this aspect. So a lot of what we did was two things. One, very aggressive product development. So as you can see in the screen, one of the things that SIP transitioned to was creating new products, specifically eco packaging. In this case, we have bubble wraps transitioned into paper honeycomb wrap that was created using laser cutting. We even had containers, disposable containers that replace the usual microwavable plastic. Like, the problem with microwavable plastics is that we just have so much of it. You want to keep it. Like, Filipinos we're very fond of keeping used containers, but there's just a point where it's impossible. You just have too many of it. So we said that, hey, there is a compostable alternative. Let's do it. So it was really a major thrust for us, not just with SIP, but even Loop as a brand. We decided that it was very clear that we wanted more people with us. We wanted to work with more people and transition it into a store that could literally have everything you could possibly think of. And I think today we're getting there, but at least when you enter the website today, loopstore.ph, you can see there's a massive assortment of things that most people probably haven't even thought of. So yeah, we have Abaca face mask. We even have linen ones now. We have an old-fashioned razor, a coffee filter made out of stainless steel, a notebook that's reusable for those who are still in school, and we even had menstrual cups that were one of the most affordable at the time that we released. So it was very clear that thrust was there. We knew that we needed to keep developing more and more products to really transition the brand, transition the brand out of straws and more really towards creating this ecosystem where one could truly be sustainable without worrying too much. Because I genuinely believe that, sure, in sustainability, we have our individual parts, but it shouldn't be made inconvenient to us. That's a very difficult thing. If you want more people to get into these types of advocacies, you have to understand that you can't force it. You can't shove it down their throats and tell them, hey, this is a sustainable thing to do. You have to do something about it. No, that's not the way it works. A lot of people will even get mad. I've had my share of that. Well, a lot of people will get mad at you. They will not be happy about you directly calling these out, because that's not how change happens. A lot of these changes will most likely happen as a gradual transition with individuals understanding it more on a deeper level, rather than some random person telling them, hey, stop using that plastic straw. You're bad for the environment. That's definitely not a way to go. But one of the other things that we were really able to employ beyond creating products was also really pushing our digital marketing strategy. And this was really founded on the lean startup method. There's a typo on the screen. I'm sorry about that. But the main idea is that we want to rethink the way we look at businesses. Essentially, we create a culture where it's all about everything is always, parang cheesy pakinggan, no? Everything is always a work in progress. Whenever we stop, for example, with the metal straws, we just stopped. We were like, you know what? Whatever. That died out. So we knew that we couldn't do that same thing that we did back then. We couldn't depend on one thing. We needed to make sure we diversify and we create multiple small tests that are always happening simultaneously. This was key to us because it was also embedded right into our product development. A lot of these products that we've ordered, we usually either have them in consignment, which means, for example, I have a a guitar shop. I want to sell sustainable guitars. Sorry, there's a guitar in front of you. I want to sell sustainable guitars, and I don't want to have to pay for every single guitar. So they'll put it in my store, and I'll get a commission for every item that they sell. So until the point that I sell it, that's the only time that we will pay them, which is good because I don't have the only thing, yung capital ko is really just my skill, our site, our audience, our reach, no actual cash out. Or if we developed our own products, it would definitely be in small batches because we wanted to make sure that we test first and verify compared to ordering a lot, believing that, kaya ko to ibenta, I can do all of this, and then ultimately be set up for failure. That's really a bad idea. It's always going to be best if you create small and quick tests that will essentially create that sustainable business model where you're continuously innovating and creating new things while making sure that the data that you collect in the process is always going to be used to inform the rest of the decision process. So as you can see, it's really just measure, learning, and building all the time. It's this non-stop process that we have to adopt. And I believe that not even just sustainable businesses, but most businesses should do this because it protects you. It protects you from from failing and not being able to make ends meet anymore. One of the example executions that we do for Loop is that we make sure that we don't really believe in business plans so much. Yes, you can plan. You can always create like a roadmap of sorts. That's much advice. But to go all the way to say that, okay, I'm gonna be sure that there's 100 customers that will sell. That means I'll earn 200,000 in the process, and that's it. That's you end there. But that's not the way it is. You don't know for a fact that those 100 customers will buy your product. So that's the ultimate flaw of these types of business plans. It assumes that customers will come, but you don't know that. That's definitely not 100% sure. So always test first and keep testing in small batches. Make sure that your customers are the ones doing the validating and not you. That's a very big thing that we made a mistake in at the start with SIP. We started saying that, hey, SIP is a great brand. We have a good audience. Let's develop this rocket tumbler, insulated tumbler. We ordered 9,000, and that was in half a what do you call this? Yung mga the container vans, the big container trucks that you'd see passing through the ports. So we filled up half of that with tumblers, and boy, was that a mistake. 3 years later, we still have around 30% of the inventory. So really, do not think that you're such an expert that, yes, I understand my customer 100%. I am sure that this will sell. No, always let your customers validate. It doesn't even have to be a perfect product at the start. That's another recipe for failure when we get so obsessed that it has to be perfect. Everything has to be done exactly the way I want it. But the thing is, like I said, a lot of the assumptions that we create are not necessarily right. Always let the customer validate. Create that minimum viable product. It doesn't have to be perfect. It can be definitely something you want to improve on in the future. Always just get it to market and test right away. Because that way, you'll manage the risk better. The losses are minimal in the event that, example, you only ordered a few at a time. And of course, it helps, especially for those who are just starting out. Another thing that's the sad part about these quick tests is that copycats will definitely come. That always happens. Do not stress whenever you see another brand out there. Oh, grabe, kinokopya na lang palagi. They're always looking at us. I always felt very, very bitter about it. But eventually I came to realize, one, there's nothing you can do about it, unfortunately, at least here in the Philippines. Maybe in the US, if you have patents, but here, good luck. So always always keep this method of continuously iterating and developing new products, and eventually a lot of those those people competing with you will eventually fizzle out if they don't do similar diversification strategies, if they just keep copying whatever you have. Because, for example, all right, we have two companies that are exactly the same. Like Loop is not the only eco-friendly store out there. So let's say brand B also copied the same product we have. The misconception is that we're fighting for the same market. Yes, that's true. But also, your audiences are actually different. This is, diba, going back to that idea about business plan creation. We will often assume that a market is homogeneous. These are all the same people who will buy the same products. But advertising on Facebook has taught me one big thing is that these are different audiences. There's millions of people in the Philippines. I don't know if you guys recently saw the recent the census update, which shows that there are already 109 million Filipinos. And even if you would say that a lot of our products are meant for people who can afford it, that's still a big chunk right now. That's about what, let's say 5 million people. And what are the odds that these people would be directly your audience? You don't know that. So going back to the two brand scenarios, you have to understand that we have, while we have overlaps, we also have individuals that support these brands separately. So even if one person it's going to be to their consumers' favor, not necessarily to us. So this is the competition fallacy, that all your customers are all the customers are free for all. No, there's a chance that their loyalty will actually side with one or the other, as long as you're able to live up to your values, especially in a sustainable business. And it's always okay to start out at a loss. It's a something that people misconceive, that yeah, I always have to be profitable at the start. It's not always the case. You have to understand that these tests are not perfect. These tests, as they are tests, there's a good chance that you'll also fail. But of course, you take this failure as something that you would use to educate your next decision process in creating your next product, in understanding the customer better. It's really just part of it, because even if if you get a customer at a loss at the start, you might develop something in the future that will eventually help you. The other sample execution that I really want to emphasize is learning and building again, specifically using tools that are easily available online. So sometimes kasi whenever people think of selling, it's just, okay, I'll post on Facebook, I'll create an Instagram page, maybe even now for you college kids. I'm 25, by the way, so I guess I'm not that far away. You'll create a TikTok. We're trying to create a TikTok. If anyone out there has ideas, send them over to the chat. Anyway, use these types of tools, that not necessarily just the most obvious, more on the business tools, not really just the social media tools. Even Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok all have business tools that could be used as technically free. Of course, you're spending for the advertising, but these are tools that are technically free, and data that you can use to collect information on what your customers purchase and educate you in creating new products again in the future. So always use these types of software. So just to name a few, Shopify is what we use for our back end. That's how we process our orders. Your website can be built directly from Shopify. That's very convenient. Omnisend is an email marketing tool. I won't delve too much into that, but to those who believe that email marketing is a sham, especially I did believe that back in college, but you come to realize that people do read it, especially older demographics, or at least people who are working, who open their emails on a daily basis. It is a good platform to create your marketing efforts. And this is the most important, I believe. Always connect your platform to some analytics software. For Loop and SIP, we use Google Analytics, and we connect this, of course, to Facebook. All of this creates very, very clear data for us to understand. Of course, I can't disclose that data since that's covered under data privacy. But you're able to use these tools to understand your customers better. Never use this data in the wrong way. Always use, these are the tools that will educate how you create A/B tests, which are, as I mentioned, part of the whole testing idea. And you keep running these small tests. It's you test one variable at a time, very much like the scientific method that you make sure that all the other things are the same. Let's put it down to an example. So if we were to post a picture of the guitar, I'm gonna put one that's in a studio setting where the background is white, and I'm gonna put another post that is being used by someone to play some music or at least a photo of it. And I'll run these tests simultaneously, figure out which one works better, which one doesn't. And that way I know that, okay, my customers prefer the in action photo because it makes sense. I understand that, oh, yeah, that's how you use a guitar. You use it for playing music. So things like these are really these small strategies that we have to keep continuously doing in order to innovate, in order to make sure that the sustainable business is always built well. So one of the a good example of what we've of this idea is our implementation of this the food part of our business. Whenever we advertise things, it always feels like, whoa, it's so major. Wow, it's like so many brands, so many products. But a lot of that is actually just the way you market things, the way you make it seem like, yes, this is a major push we're doing. We probably spent hundreds of thousands just creating this. But in reality, we only spent around 50,000 just to get this unit of the business up and running. And in its first month, it already earned 25. So lo and behold, it wasn't really the test panned out well. And we knew that the risk was really minimal. The worst case was we had an extra freezer worth 23,000. That's it. After that, what are we going to do? Maybe sell it, probably. So what was the risk to the business? Nothing. Absolutely. Well, I mean, I guess our time and effort, but that's part of the business process. But aside from that, cash-wise, we didn't really spend anything. Now, one thing I forgot to mention, by the way, is that when we develop products, we always have to. Okay, this is a topic for another day. Definitely not something I thought of talking about in today. Was that you have to build this type of brand. It's a brand that will ultimately not just sell things. It's really talking about something. It's really pushing certain types of values. And this is how we develop the core to how we develop our products. It always ties back to that brand. It always ties back to the values that we have set at the start. So for example, all right, this is another good case study for the foods. The biggest problem that we encountered when we said that, okay, let's expand to the food category, I think it's worth exploring, was that you can't exactly sell these types of food in reusable packaging. Yes, you can. Of course, some people argue otherwise, but in the setting of the Philippines and the fact that some of these items are actually what do you call this, imported, you can't force them to, okay, please put it in reusable containers, please refill it for us. Even that has its challenges on the local level. So how much more for other products that are already pre-made, and it makes the logistics process more prone to creating waste. So when we develop this product, one of the key things that we always emphasize with Loop is we need to make sure that our deliveries are plastic free. But all of you can probably see the photos today, the photo right in front of you today, the on meat, the Better Butter, Beyond Beef, Omni Pork, they're all in plastic. And you might wonder, okay, so how does that tie to your value? One of the things that we pushed for when we developed this was we really needed to become a collection point for it. We needed to have a clear recovery program because plastic is a very complex issue. People think that banning plastic is the only way to go, but that's easier said than done, not to mention the food security that plastic and these types of packaging have brought in. So we said that, okay, let's do the next best thing. Let's make sure that there's a very clear and easy way, as at least for the at least for people living in Metro Manila or Greater Manila area, to drop off their waste, because that way you still create that circular economy which Loop aspires for, which is again the brand that Loop on its own literally means to close the loop, to make sure that everything you buy from our store will have a clear path in the event that you don't use it anymore. Either it's compostable, either it's reusable, either it's recyclable. That's always going to be key to what we do. So we have to make sure that when you create these types of brands, it needs to be really rooted in values. In our case, it's that value that we have to make sure that it's good for the environment. It's not just about, oh, it's a nice product, it's popular, we're gonna have it on our store. Of course not. We're very, very picky about the brands that we choose. It has to be environmentally friendly. It has to have a brand that also calls for it, because there's a lot of people out there selling eco-friendly things just for the sake of selling, and most of the time we would not really work with them. We make sure that we meet our merchants, we understand how they behave, we understand how we can work together to really get us to our goal, because it's going to be, there's a lot of people out there who are doing it just for money, and no hard feelings about it, but it's just that as Loop, we probably won't work with you, because we know that we have to stay true to our brand, because this is what our customers understand. This is how they interact with us. This is how they believe in us. And the fact that the trust is very, very important. We need to stay transparent, we need to stay honest, and we need to stay true to our values. One more thing that I wanted to talk about today is the fact that another thing that we keep doing is understanding the customer journey. Oftentimes, kasi diba, whenever we sell, how do I put this? Whenever we sell, it's always just, okay, nabentahan kita, I get my profit, and that's it. And maybe we'll have future interactions, but I might not push it so much. But that's another big mistake if you're trying to build a brand. If you really want something sustainable in the business sense, you really need to understand your customer journey. And again, as I mentioned, there are tools that help with this. You have OmniSend, you have Google Analytics. But the point is, you have to understand how your customer interacts. And this goes back again to your business development, that a lot of the information that you gather here, that you study, will educate that process and make that product development aspect much easier. Because think about it, whenever you buy a product, and even let's use our favorite Boodle Fest, Shopee. So whenever you buy a product, there's a good chance that you'll probably just add to cart. You might hover over it, you might like it, but the point is, you don't completely understand what you're doing. But as a business, you really have to understand that. You have to understand, bakit sila nag-heart pero hindi nag-add to cart? Or maybe why did they add to cart for 7 days, drop it, and then 7 days later purchase? That doesn't make sense from an outright just viewing of the data. You need to understand that, okay, this customer, you might even go as far as doing a focus group discussion, talking to your customers directly. That's one way to do it. But of course, there are ways you can do it differently. So for example, going back to that example, the and removed it, might have found, you can observe that they might have dropped the product, and it's something that they didn't really want. You studied their profile and what items did they buy from the cart, and you can eventually profile them as, okay, maybe they are most likely this type of customer that they're indecisive but they purchase. So that's okay. That's definitely not a problem. Now that you know that, you can create more things that will eventually cater to that aspect. How do you call this? Another part of that customer journey is that you have to check this funnel. There's this people at the top who will have a good amount of interest for your business, followed by another set of people who are more engaged, who are gonna interact with your brand more before they finally purchase. You have to understand that it's really gonna be a funnel. People think that, oh no, 100 people added to cart, but only 10 purchase. That's fine. That's actually fine. At least that specific number I said, 10% is a good amount for in terms of conversions from people who add to cart. As to why, the main explanation behind that is that people just add to cart because they feel like they're interested in it, but they don't necessarily want to commit to purchasing it. Because especially with our types of brands, the purchase is a very clear sign that they are voting for your brand. So you have to understand that aspect, that it's a funnel. You have to figure out each step of the way. This is the easiest way to segment it, at least. You have to figure out each step of the way and how to engage them best at each stage. So for example, to that visitor, the visitor part of the funnel, these are all just about interest. It's about creating viral content, creating content that is very much, yes, I want to interact with your brand. That's the key part. The add to cart part is going to be a lot about how they perceive the value of the item. So one thing that you could do to really optimize this is to actually give discount codes. I know that sounds weird, but that's unfortunately how the industry works. That especially in the Philippines, like you give them free shipping, 5% off. That optimizes this part of the funnel. And finally, the purchasing. And people think it stops here, but this is actually a very critical part of the business. Once a person purchases, you know that they believe in your brand, and you know that you have to retain them. And this is where we start employing other strategies of trying to retain them. Example, one thing that we want to actually do that we haven't tested yet is that we are going to add a community program where people can really understand, help each other, and figure out how to become more environmentally friendly. And that creates a good amount of value in relation to what our customers actually need. Sorry. I wanted to briefly share though that it's the business process, this entire process, that all those complex things that I have been sharing with you today, they're they're pretty tiring. They're not exactly the easiest way to get through life. There's a lot you have to consider. There's so many things that you're going to go through. And one of the things that you recently did was we closed down our store, as I mentioned, back in 2020. And people think it was a really sad thing. If you look at the left, that's actually my house back in Metro Manila, where we used the garage. That's really it. It was a semi-outdoor experience that we really just had no choice. We were like, okay, we have to make it work. We have to compromise. We have to just really stay as a lean business that is agile and able to do these tests quickly and as efficiently as possible. And at that time, at least in COVID time, where I sometimes would end up packing the orders whenever a staff couldn't come in because of commuting issues, this seemed perfect for us. It wasn't the best conditions, but for that time, it was okay. And thankfully, imagine from back then, in when was that? June of 2020, where we were probably doing only 3-4 orders a day as compared to SIP's hundreds of orders in a day. Finally, we were able to recover. We hit around 30 to 40 orders now. Again, we were able to improve our warehouse. We were able to use these small tests and figure out that, hey, maybe there is something we can do about it. It's never going to be the end of the line, even in the worst possible scenarios. As long as you keep testing, you keep improving, and you make sure that you always stay true to what makes you your brand. So thank you so much, everyone. I don't want to keep my talk too long. I'm sure there's questions out there. Feel free to ask them. Thank you again so much. My name is Poch, and it's been a pleasure to talk to you all.
Thank you so much, Sir Pocholo. I personally learned a lot from it. Also, if you guys have any questions, if you guys can't ask questions right now, please feel free to email as well, Sir Poch. He's also very responsive. So, ayon, Sir Poch, I've been receiving a lot of questions through private messages actually. I think shy sila mag-ask kasi through the chat box. So, okay, I have quite a lot of questions. So, is it okay to ask now?
Yeah, we have until 5:30, no?
Yes,
technically. All right.
So, for the first question po, do you have any tips on starting a business about sustainable items but not having the means to make these items?
Not having the means. All right, sige. So trade secret. Always just look for other brands at the start. That's how we started it. That's how we really started Loop. We had SIP as our in-house product, and that took a while to develop. But there are other brands out there, and that's a nice thing. Back in 2016, wala talagang sustainable brands, and all suddenly now in what year? 2021. What year? Well, 2021. We're here. There are so many brands. Just use the hashtag sustainable, and you'll see so many out there. You can start out with a few brands, maybe just even 5 to start, and that's always gonna be better than nothing. I'll be perfectly transparent with a lot of people. There are a lot of products that are developed not just by SIP, but also affiliate partners of SIP in the form of our brands that import things directly from China, and we co-develop it with certain suppliers there as well. It's a complex issue. I completely understand that, and I really wish if there was a better way to do it, we would. But yeah, it's a complex issue, and I guess we can discuss it over email or whatnot, or address it a different time. So Alibaba is your friend. It's actually pretty easy once you figure it out.
Thank you so much for that. Ayan. Thank you daw, Sir Pocholo. Thank you. Okay, let's jump right into the next question. So, what happens if making a more eco-friendly version hinders the quality of performance compared to the original one? Do you just scrap the idea? If not, how do you manage to work your way around these?
Very good question. That's one thing we always tell our customers now, that a lot of our products, as I mentioned earlier, these are products that might still be on their initial test. I mean, not initial testing. Of course, we tested it with usually our influencer network, but of course, that's not a perfect test. That's just what 10, 15 people that might test at the start. So we always tell our customers that you are part of this development process. If there is something we could improve on the product, always tell us. We're more than happy to receive feedback. That's the first step, that you acknowledge that it's not going to be a perfect product, and you tell people, you tell your community that they are capable of actually creating these improvements. Now, the problem with these is not all the feedback that we receive will be acted upon, and that's how it is with most product development, because most of the time, if you want to really put your time into improving this one product, especially for us where we have hundreds, if you put your time to improving this one product, you have to make sure that it really is worth it. And that's where it splits up. Now, are we going to develop it more, or are we going to drop the product? And there's really times that we will drop the product. But if we have, beyond the economical side of it, if we really, really believe in a product, then yes, that's our way of voting into it, that we will improve it even if it comes at a loss from the start. So a lot of factors come into play, but the main thing is that we always take the feedback of the customer to use to improve that product that we choose to improve.
Yan. Thank you so much, Sir Poch. Okay, the next question. Ito medyo mahaba-haba to. Okay, so isn't making eco-friendly products more expensive than using regular material? And then my follow-up question siya, if it is actually much cheaper than the regular materials used, why do people still use unsustainable materials? Is it because it's easier to gather? And then the second question, if it costs more, how do you manage to break even the sales with the cost of making these items?
Sorry, got it. So for the first part, it is usually more expensive. It really is more expensive. So for let's put an example to it. So the reason why plastic is very, very prevalent in our society today is it's so cheap to produce. It's really, really mind-blowingly cheap. As in, you can buy probably plastic bags for as low as what, 25 cents at cost. There are gonna be, if you of course buy, that's buying in bulk. Malamang if you buy from Facebook Marketplace, probably you'll get it at piso, 2 pesos. That's just because there's enough margins for the entire supply chain. You have to understand that's why it becomes a complex issue. No, na a lot of the pricing depends largely on the cost of doing business. So for example, in the case of, let's look at plastic muna. The reason it's being offered at such a low rate, aside from the fact that its cost is actually low, is that there's a lot of participants in the market, and very clear established participants that can afford to stay, example, like see 25 cents. They might be only earning 3, 4, 5 centavos on plastic bag, but they're selling millions. So it makes sense, diba? It makes sense na I can still survive. I can still manage the cost of doing business because the market is this big. Now, with going to sustainable businesses naman, it is, as I mentioned, it is definitely more expensive, but not always because of the direct cost of the material itself. A lot of the costs of a product are going to be dependent on the development. One interesting example that I really love aviation, so I'll use this as an example. Whenever you develop an airplane, it's a 25-year process, like from the idea all the way to breaking even. So you spend hundreds of millions of dollars on the development phase. So you have to make sure that hundreds of millions of dollars have to be compensated somewhere within the capabilities of the market. That's why, of course, aside from the fact that planes are cost a lot, they cost much more because of the cost of development. So going to sustainable items, the cost of development might not be that expensive, but because it's distributed over fewer, how do you call this, fewer products or fewer quantities, then of course the price has to go up. The price needs to compensate that supplier for producing the product itself. So it's really inevitable that when a market is still starting out, when it's small, products will be a bit expensive. But if you really look at how this another example with it is possible for sustainable things to become more affordable. When we started SIP, the average cost of straws that I could see on the market was around 170 to 200 pesos. So we said, let's compete. Let's make it 120. So we were like, wow, it's cheap. But eventually, more people got into the market, more manufacturers started making metal straws, and the price slowly went down. So if you look at, don't buy from SIP now. If you look at Shopee, Lazada now, you'll find metal straws as low as 40 or 50 pesos. And I won't blame you, especially if you just want to start out your sustainable journey, or even wanna, what do you call this? Wanna start your own brand of metal straws. If you buy it at that price, then be my guest. I'll be more than happy to, because you're still adding to this entire process of improving the market. So it's inevitable when you're starting a new product or starting a new idea. This is not including luxury brands, this is just ordinary products, maybe even commodities in general. When it's new to the market, it's always going to be expensive because there's less competition, more cost of development, and people are more open to also paying more at the start because, as I mentioned, this is a brand that really believes in developing products that people might not even be interested in. So we have to think about the cost of that aspect of business, that if this fails, maybe this other product will be the one to salok the costs incurred from that. Hope that answers that question. Pretty complex issue, definitely.
Thank you so much, Sir Poch, for that. Okay, so I saw one person raising his hand, si Spike.
Yeah.
You want to
Go ahead.
turn off your mute button so that you can be the one to ask Sir Poch your question. Hello, Spike, are you there? Okay, I think he's not here yet, so I'll proceed muna to the next questions. Okay.
Right.
All right, so I have more questions to ask. So one participant messaged me, Sir Poch, I love your The Last Straw initiative. As someone who's an advocate for sustainability, I switched over to using metal straws. However, I have difficulty convincing people to switch to metal straws as well, since it is usually more than 10 times the price of a regular plastic straw. They have usually argued that they do not use straws as much and kaartehan lang daw yung mga metal straws, which is why they still use plastic straws. So any tips on how to persuade people on using metal straws?
All right. First of all, thank you though for mentioning The Last Straw. At least to the people who don't know, it was one of our nonprofit projects. We did it back in 2018. We worked with a local government unit in Quezon City to how do you call this? To reduce the amount of plastic straws through non-punitive ways. Kasi the most common thing, I don't know if you see it these days, there's a lot of push for banning plastic straws altogether, or mga plastic labo, stirrers. The more how do you call this? The more negligible plastics, kumbaga, na could be avoided naman somehow. But I do acknowledge that it's not a perfect policy, because anything punitive, anything that does not what do you call this, take into account the context of individual people, is often going to be set for disaster. Like, sure, mapapasa mo yan sa Senado, but how are you going to implement it? People are not even going to follow it. Like whatever, what's a 500 peso fine for a business if they can save thousands in using plastic straws, diba? That's again, these are complex issues for another day. So going back to the question, how would we convince individuals to actually make the switch? And I guess with metal straws, definitely the case has become tougher now because the way people perceive these types of things is now, aside from the fact that you said kaartehan lang, I do genuinely believe that one thing that you can do, I will not encourage anyone to use a metal straw if they don't even need it at all. I'd rather that person actually uses nothing. They can drink from the cup, right? You can sip directly from your tumblers. That's definitely a possibility. And it highly depends on the context of the person. But of course, I understand that we want more of our friends, more people to really make the switch. And one of the best things you could do is just staying consistent and staying true to these values. So you start doing it, you start posting about it, you start talking about it. And there are always going to be haters. There are always going to be people who do not believe in it. And you don't have to convince them. Chances are, alam mo naman how it is, diba? These days with politics, DDS versus Dilawan. You're never gonna convince a DDS to become a Dilawan. Like that's never that. I mean, of course, it does happen, but it rarely happens because when one person is very convinced in what they believe, and chances are you're not going to convince them by telling them they're wrong. The best way to convince these people is to really to show them that there is merit to what you're doing, and eventually maybe even convince them to do otherwise. So yeah, hope that helps.
Thank you so much for that, Sir Poch. So, okay, another question. Okay, so since several shops online have started selling and switching to more eco-friendly products, especially on Instagram, on Facebook, especially nung nag-pandemic, ang dami. So, okay, the question is, how do you make yours stand out?
Good branding, definitely good branding and good marketing. Of course, aside from, well, no, it's not aside, it's part of it pala. Part of the branding is definitely, aside from making things look nice, making it look presentable and non-punitive, it has a lot. I do believe it has a lot to do with really staying consistent to the values. There are going to be so many competitors that I told you will pop up, will especially during quarantine, and I've seen so many of them start and eventually not, or maybe either die out or just stop altogether. And that's perfectly normal. So I wouldn't really worry too much about that aspect, because as long as you really stay true to these values and make sure that it's very clear in your actions, very clear in your messaging, then people will be convinced to stay with you talaga, because they won't, if they already trust Loop, they already know that that the things we develop have been studied, have been verified, have been double checked. And while that's not 100% assurance, maybe 95 siguro, because we're human. At the very least, you know that we're honest about it. We're not gonna lie to you outright about it just for the sake of money. I think that's very, very important when you build a brand, that relationship and trust that you build with your customers.
Thank you so much for that, Sir Poch. Actually, follow-up question. So since you mentioned that it's very important to build these relationships, so for SIP and for Loop, how do you build these relationships? Like, how do you specifically target customers, partners to actually have this bond and relationship with your brand?
So one thing that I've been before with Loop, with SIP, it was hard because it blew out of, I don't know what happened. Like it just blew out of proportions. I lost track of that, and I did regret it in a way. That's why the store was built, because I wanted a place where we could talk to customers firsthand, and that was how we really built these relationships. We made a lot of friends. I made a lot of friends from that process. But I told myself, it's quarantine, and it's gonna be like this for the next year at least. We'll probably open a store again, maybe late 2022 or maybe even 2023. So I said, okay, how are we going to do it? Let's do something about it. I email customers directly. I tell them that, hey, I would genuinely want to get to know you. I do believe we are on the same page, and I really want to minimize the fact that it feels like kind of focus group discussion that I'm trying to gather market insights from them. Indirectly, I do, but I really prioritize the building of the relationship, because it's that I go back to that idea that you have to build that trust talaga by being human, just talking to people.
Thank you so much for that, Sir Poch. Okay, may question sa chat box na hindi private message. So,
Yeah, I
it's
see.
from Hannah. Hi, Sir Pocholo. With all the current restrictions during this pandemic, how did it affect your way of making these products?
Make as in like I wanted to clarify.
Yes, I think so. I think that's the question. Hannah, can you clarify? Is it the manufacturing of the products? Manufacturing daw po.
Manufacturing. Okay. That definitely had a dent. It at the start, especially factories were closed, manufacturers were closed, so we just really stuck to our products and really just rode it out. We were running at a loss for about 6 months. 6 months from the start of the pandemic, we were already bleeding. So we weren't really able to figure out a way to make it sustainable. I guess one thing that helped was the fact that we had a good assortment of local products. And while there were border restrictions, we weren't dependent anymore on the imported ones, but rather really focused on the local ones. I think that's the best way I could answer the question.
Thank you so much, Sir Pocholo. I received another direct message. So he's asking, how do you apply all your advocacies in your own life? Like besides your business, like in your personal life, how do you apply your advocacies?
Hmm. Uh, very philosophical. My pagka-philosophy question. I think that's the biggest misconception, that I'm super like hardcore environmentalist, that I'm completely vegan. I throw zero waste. I think there's a good person to follow back then was Lauren Singer. She was that her jar was her bot her trash was in a bottle, was all for 5 years fit in one bottle. That was one of the breakthrough stories back then. But I'm not really that type of person, not super hardcore. I wish I was, but I honestly think that there are things that I can improve on that aspect. But one of the things that really drove me to build this business, more than the environmental side and more than the experience side, is really my belief in doing good. I told myself that in the worst case scenario that this business doesn't pan out, I'll be happy doing another job another job, as long as it's able to improve the lives of others and really just being mindful. I think that's very, very important. That's a key part of sustainability. Mindfulness being you really just being sensitive to the environment around you, and that includes the people, that includes other people, the current events that are happening. For example, a common question I've received before was, how do you handle the medical waste that's coming out, all the added plastic and medical waste that's coming as a result of the pandemic? And I'm like, it's a tricky question, because what are you going to compromise on? Are you going to compromise on people's health? Of course not. The person comes first. It's a life that you have to save. You have to protect as an individual. So in that case, I'm gonna have to concede on the environmental side, and those are things I'm gonna have to live with. Like you have to. I understand. As I remember when I was straight out of college, I was very much I would say more purist, more like I believe like these are my values. It has to be carried out the way I truly believe it. But in the course of 5 years, I've made so many compromises, some of which I regret. And voila, you have to live with it and be better. I think that's always going to be key to creating that lifestyle that I see in myself.
Love that. Okay, I have actually a follow-up question to that. Since you mentioned about plastics being cheap kanina, like during your talk, I'm just curious. Sir Poch, do you think na may chance na mawala yung plastic, like in the long run, like in the future? Do you think there is a chance that everyone can be sustainable?
Plastic being gone, no. Everyone being sustainable, yes. Plastic being gone, why not? Because uh, you going back to that food example, are you if you wanted to buy food from another part of the world, how is it gonna get here? It's gonna get here by plastic, or else it's gonna rot. It's gonna rot in the process, diba? So as a result, you create food waste naman. So what in this case, what are you gonna create? Food waste that creates a lot of CO2 emissions, or plastic waste that actually has little carbon emissions, but of course it has that negative side of plastic pollution. I do believe though that why I say yes to can everyone become sustainable in the future is there is a way to develop products kasi that is more sustainable. I do believe in again creating these small steps, creating these small improvements, and I think we're getting there. It's going to be a long process, maybe 30, 40, 50 years before we really figure it out. But for example, one item that's developed as a plastic product and same functionality pa rin is cassava plastic that dissolves in water. We actually had one of those manufactured. They make it in Indonesia. It's made out of cassava starch. So it's not perfect. It's very expensive. Like even I wouldn't want to use it because it's just expensive. But there are people out there who will, and that's okay. Because it's again it's a complex issue. If you price something expensive, you're gonna have to carry that over to the consumer, and you might lose money in the process because nobody is willing to buy at that price, and that's happened for us so many times, and that's fine. But again, going back, I do believe that there are going to be these developments that will be forcing our society to progress and create better alternatives, and that's why I truly believe that at some point we can be a more sustainable society.
Thank you so much, Sir Poch. Okay, we're jumping right into the next question from Meryl from the chat. So, hello po. Good afternoon, she said. I'd like to ask your take on homemade packaging po. Examples are recycled paper from a small and large business perspective. Because although it's both cheap and sustainable, it takes a lot of time and manpower. But do you think it's worth it?
It depends on your customer mostly, actually. Like there are customers who will value this so much, and that way I honestly believe that people should be paid what they're worth. Like example, I guess food panda riders. I'm currently in Butuan kasi, and if I was like, oh my god, the delivery fee 9 pesos. What? What are you gonna do with 9 pesos? Like, oh my god, that is such a it's such a critical thing in my head. Na, is this really worth it at the cost of the rider? These are other questions. But going back to that sense of worth, it can be possible, but I encourage that people who make these homemade packaging to start charging a little more, because that is ang kapalit. Sure, you're not spending because it's recycled paper, but yung kapalit mo is oras mo naman. Your time, your own time has value. So I do think it will be worth it if you charge just a little more, like add a few pesos per item. Somehow that will at least compensate for it. But yeah, it tricky talaga. It is expensive, and I do believe that too.
Ayun. Thank you so much, Sir Poch. Now we're down to the last question. So,
oh my god, 6 pesos. Kay Meryl. Wild. Sorry, go ahead.
Okay, now that pandemic is upon us, people become more weary of acquiring the virus, making them more hesitant to share things with others, most especially things as intimate as a straw. Given that you have partnered up with some establishments and you're the Last Straw initiative, how has this affected your initiative for reusable straws? Did some partners switch over to single-use straws in the light of the pandemic?
Yes, they did. But they tried to at least switch to the sustainable-ish alternatives. So, example, paper straws, rice straws. Mostly, they really don't use the straws that we provide them anymore because wala na ding dine-in for a lot of these establishments. So that's the unfortunate reality. And thankfully, there more people have been receptive naman to just not using straws at all. So at least that worked for some. But for the others, wala talaga. They had to switch, at least not to plastic straws, but to the more sustainable alternatives.
Ayan. Thank you so much, Sir Poch. Okay. So before we end our webinar, I would like to to show you the certificate of appreciation. Can you allow me to share screen, Sir Poch?
Oh yeah, sure. Oh shit, sorry. Naka-on pa pala yun the whole time. My bad.
No, it's alright, so that they can see the website also and then your contact details. Kasi feel ko madaming hindi nagtatanong sa audience because they're shy or they haven't come up with a question
Okay.
yet. So if you guys have any questions in mind, please feel free to email Sir poch@sip.ph. So ayan, before we end, I'd like to show Sir Poch his certificate of appreciation that is given today, July 9, 2021 at Manila, Philippines. So okay, Sir Poch, are we okay to have like a photo? So Zoom
Yes,
right
go ahead.
now. Okay.
Absolutely.
Everyone, can you guys turn on your cameras? Let's have a picture taking. Ayan. To those who have not opened their cameras yet, we'll be waiting. Ayan. Diba? Sana na kanina kayo open ng camera. Ayan. Hi, everyone. Although sa ibang di maka-open, I understand. Kasi alam ko na you guys came from, different provinces and it's raining. Tapos yung iba naka-data lang. Yeah, okay. So, I'll give you guys 10 more seconds. 10, 9. Okay, guys, open your cameras to those who aren't opening yet. React na lang kayo sa Zoom if you guys can. Okay. All right, so let's take a photo. 3, 2, 1. Okay. Ayan. Thank you so much, Sir Poch, for today.
Thank you so much, everyone. If ever you need to contact me, my email, I'll put it there, and of course, usual contact details: www.sip.ph and www.loopstore.ph. You can also follow me on IG at the Pochespina.
Thank
If
you
you have
so
any
much.
questions that you want to shoot in private.